Now, let me give you an example of how our proposal will work when it becomes law in the United States. A husband and wife will receive $4,000 in monthly universal basic income, which will be $2,000 monthly for the husband and $2,000 monthly for the wife, which totals $24,000 annually for the husband and $24,000 annually for the wife, which totals $48,000 in yearly household universal basic income, which will not be taxed, but will be indexed to inflation. So when inflation increases, the amount of money people receive will increase. Also, the amount of $2,000 can be increased through legislation. And as the Federal Reserve Act states, there is currently no expiration date or repeal date for the Federal Reserve. There will be no expiration date or repeal date for the universal basic income that will be tied directly to the Federal Reserve System. People throughout the United States are struggling financially, and $2,000 per month in universal basic income will help them and will be an excellent move in the positive direction concerning ending poverty in the United States of America. For our viewers who may not have heard, we submitted our proposal for $2,000 in monthly United States universal basic income via certified mail in February 2021 to President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and others in Congress whom we believe would be receptive to our proposal. Our proposal was submitted through the First Amendment right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We also submitted our proposal electronically in December 2020 to members of Congress whom we believe would be receptive to our proposal. Now, inside of our proposal, we reminded the Democratic representatives who received our mailings about the words of Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson, who stated some important words concerning poverty in the United States. According to a 2014 House Budget Committee report at budget.house.gov entitled "The War on Poverty, 50 Years Later," President Lyndon B. Johnson stated the following words in his 1964 book entitled "My Hope for America," and I quote, "We have declared unconditional war on poverty. Our objective is total victory. I believe that 30 years from now, Americans will look back upon these 1960s as the time of the Great American Breakthrough toward the victory of prosperity over poverty." End of quote. President Johnson stated, "We have declared unconditional war on poverty." Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines unconditional as not conditional or limited. In other words, the war on poverty is not subject to any conditions. President Johnson knew that the war on poverty would need many great ideas and legislative efforts to bring the desired results. Our proposal will bring the desired results. According to the House Budget Committee website at budget.house.gov, President Lyndon B. Johnson stated the following words in his 1964 State of the Union address, and I quote, "Our aim is not only to relieve the symptom of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. No single piece of legislation, however, is going to suffice." End of quote. President Johnson's statement in and of itself proved that the war on poverty was going to be one in which other pieces of legislation would be necessary to relieve, cure, and prevent poverty. Our proposed legislation can relieve, cure, and prevent poverty because that's how it's designed. Not only can our proposed legislation end poverty in the United States, it can end the United States national debt when they use our proposed funding mechanism to pay off the national debt. As stated earlier, we propose utilizing the Federal Reserve System to fund United States universal basic income because of the fact that the Federal Reserve System has been creating money out of thin air to add liquidity to the banking system and/or lend money to the United States federal government to cover the deficit in the form of an operating cash loan. So the Federal Reserve System can be utilized to fund universal basic income. Let's look at some historical data along with other information to prove our point. First, let's look at the historical data in Figure 1 from the Congressional Budget Office, which covers revenues, outlays, deficits, surpluses, and debt held by the public since 1962 in billions of dollars. We'll start with the year 1971, which was the year the Nixon administration suspended the gold standard. This resulted in fiat money, which is money that's made to be legal tender by the government, even though it has no gold backing it. Or in other words, money created out of thin air. There is also another side of money creation out of thin air, whereby the Federal Reserve, through computer keystrokes, creates money out of thin air to purchase securities to add liquidity to the banking system and/or loan money to the United States federal government, which is placed into the government's operating cash account at the Federal Reserve. Money is loaned to the United States federal government by the Federal Reserve to cover the deficit. Now we're going to cover the deficit, the Federal Reserve, and some other important information. Next, look at the total column. The total column data clearly shows there were deficits, or in other words, a negative balance each fiscal year from 1971 until 1998. In 1998, there was a surplus, or in other words, a positive balance each fiscal year for 4 years, from 1998 to 2001. From 2002 until 2020, there were deficits, or in other words, a negative balance each fiscal year. Out of 49 years, the United States federal government operated 45 fiscal years at a deficit, or in other words, a negative balance for 45 fiscal years. And the United States federal government operated at a surplus, or in other words, a positive balance, only 4 fiscal years. Also, according to datalab.usaspending.gov, in 2021, the government collected $4.05 trillion in revenue, and the government spent $6.82 trillion. So 2021 was also a deficit year. Now, how did the United States federal government do this and keep the economy rolling? The Federal Reserve System has been utilized to cover deficits as needed. And as the Federal Reserve System has been utilized to benefit the rich as a result of massive tax cuts favoring the rich, which cut tax revenue and added to the deficit as a result, and as the Federal Reserve System has been utilized to add liquidity to the banking system, which benefits the banks and leaves the poor and middle class in debt, then the Federal Reserve System can be utilized to benefit the poor and middle class through funding $2,000 in United States monthly government guaranteed universal basic income, indexed to inflation and not taxed, for all poor and middle class citizens at least 18 years of age. We'll stop here for today and we'll pick it up in the next video.